Ozark St. Francis National Forest. More than 1.2 million acres that hop and skip across a natural state like the patchwork of a homemade Ozark Mountains quilt. The Ozark Mountains of Arkansas are a physical place, a geological formation, and a cultural landscape where new memories are made and the traces of history can be found underfoot. Here are the stories of people who shaped this landscape in the past and who are managing it for the future. Stories of memoryscape and landscape along the Mulberry River.
100 years ago, there were many small communities along the Mulberry. Today, only Oak remains. While we have only a few visible structural remnants of those other communities, stories of past lives and experiences have survived, being passed down from one generation to another.
The first European Americans probably came to this landscape as early as the 1830s when Arkansas and this area was open for statehood. These communities likely never had any kind of electricity as the source of power for their farmsteads and house places, but many of them very early in the 20th century had phone lines thanks to the Forest Service. Settlers were looking for a place where they could come and had good arable land that they could use for agriculture and as a way to support their families. So this area was probably fairly attractive to them because of its location along the Mulberry River, which is a seasonal source of water. They were practicing subsistence agriculture. Many things were done on a trade or barter basis, and it wasn't until you got to the end of the 19th century and early 20th century that they needed some income, some kind of source of cash money, that way of life no longer worked as well for them. People need a place to go to retell stories, to remember, basically to reconstitute those historical identities that are part of their families over the years. And so I think that's what you see happening also at places like the Oak store and Turner Bend and other places on the river that give people the opportunity to revisit those places and tell their stories to the younger generation.
The store has been here, they say, since 1890, serving a very small community. To have a town, you have to have a store, and this was a friendly place. It had a little porch with a bench.
In 1970, I played basketball in this old gym, and it was heated with a coal stove. And sometimes we'd come up and hunt and come into this store and we'd buy gas here.
When we were first here, the mega stores were not quite developed in Arkansas. There were a lot of smaller stores. Many of those have disappeared, but this one remains, and it's a key to identifying this community.
There's such a passionate following of the store. You know, the winter months get slow, yes, but you know, in the spring and the summer and the fall, we hear from people that will drive from all over the United States to come here, and you know that you can't build that anywhere now. You know, it's an old, built in 1890. It's an old place. You can't recreate that.
One thing that sticks out in my mind that I just cherish and I love is when I get to open up the store and you know, Brian, he just walked out of here, but he's got a fire made. Gary, Paul Ray, Eugene, Junior, his wife Jeannie, they all come in here. They're all ordering. They all sit right over there by the wood stove, keeping warm and talking about whatever. Roy Melson coming in, filling up his '79 Ford truck and getting a cup of coffee and wanting to talk politics while I flip eggs all morning. I like that.
At the complete opposite end of Highway 215, history also has an important place in the heart of the Turner Bend store.
Turner Bend is the focal point of this area, of this community here, and you know, we've got an over 100-year tradition we've got to uphold and build upon.
My great-grandfather built the first store with Uncle Gilbert, and it was down on the creek, just where the old bridge was. It started about 1911. And then whenever they rebuilt the bridge and built the new bridge out here is when they moved the store up, built a store up here. The one that was here just before this, it was a white store, painted white, and it was a filling station and bus stop, and then of course just a regular country store is what it was. You just can't hardly have a community if you don't have a gathering place, and people can come here and have their coffee in the morning.
Many thousands of people frequent turn or bend over the course of a year. Like for here, a regular customer might be somebody that comes once a year because just once a year they find themselves in this valley.
The community that stops here now, they're from all over the United States. They come here and they love the pig trail. It's really a come-to place, and they stop and the kids, whenever they grow older, they'll come back through and bring their families.
So people here in distant communities, as well as people that in the public that use it today recreationally, all have connections to this landscape that are different. They're not mutually exclusive, and they can be very deep in terms of what they represent. And although people may utilize the landscape today differently than what they did 100, 150 years ago, their attachments to this landscape are still very, very strong.
Like a treasure hunt, because from each cemetery you go to, you'll find some little part of the puzzle. I don't think you find these same things in other parts of the country. I have been obsessed with cemeteries from the time I was a child, and my grandfather was a cemetery sexton in southern Illinois. I would say that was the beginning of this lifelong passion.
I became interested in cemeteries because of my genealogical work. You can't research family history unless you get into the cemetery aspect of it.
It's not just the tombstones. There's the symbolism on the stones, there's the plants, the things people planted in graveyards, the burial customs themselves, the evidence of hymns, the poetry on the tombstones, even the men and one woman who carved the tombstones and signed their names. So there's just this richness of information, material, that's right out there in plain sight.
Cemeteries come alive when people start to show interest in the stories under the tombstones. They reveal our past so we can understand our present.
When Denny was killed, I believe because her father didn't get justice for her, because the men who supposedly did it were shot trying to escape and buried at unmarked graves, that he wanted the world to know who did this to his daughter. So he puts their names on Bill Chenoweth, which would be, I think Chenoweth would be like the more modern spelling, and Joe Forbush, B-U-S-H, which would probably be Faubus, same as Governor Faubus. That would be the more modern spelling. But he puts their names on and their motive. They murdered this lovely child to get the family out to look so they might rob and steal. It was to create diversion to rob the house, which they didn't do. But because he didn't get justice, I think he puts their names on. And in every case that I know of where a murderer's name is on a stone, it doesn't just say John Smith was murdered, but John Smith was murdered by, it's because the murderer got away scot-free.
Down the road, just a couple of miles away, we can learn more about the Hill family past at Yale Cemetery.
This is the stone of Obed Hill, also the Hill family. And Obed was from this area. He was a single man who was the support of his parents. He had brothers and sisters, and he went off to Camp Funston, Kansas to work in the bank. Captain Whistler, came into the bank, tied up the employees, and hacked them to death with a hatchet, including the bank president, who managed to crawl away, escape, and was not killed. But 4 of the employees were killed. And Captain Whistler also robbed the bank, went back to his barracks, wrote a suicide note that said, "I have been thinking of committing suicide for a long time, but I never had a good reason. Yesterday I went out and made myself a reason." And then he fired a service revolver into his head, 2 shots. The second one killed him. They found the money under his bed, they found the gun, they found the hatchet. So that was the end of the story. A stone of this size and with all of this writing on it, my guess is that his life insurance went to buy his tombstone, unless the family was very wealthy. But as I said, he was supporting his parents. The bottom of the stone has a long poem on it that's signed Obed, which it basically says, if you have someone that you love, tell them while they're alive, don't wait till they're dead. So there's this sort of extra irony that their son is killed in a horrible robbery, and then they put this poem that says, let the living know that you love them while they're still alive, on his stone.
My favorite part of a cemetery like this is just the fact that these were actual people who lived here, people who had homes here and made this part of Arkansas what it is. It's important for families to know where their ancestors are buried and where they ended up. A lot of people think it's a little bit of a weird connection, but those are their ancestors, and people go out and find a tombstone of their ancestors and they make a real connection. It's like it satisfies them in an aspect of their family history where their people ended up and to see where they lived and where they were buried.
My name is Tom Duggan. I'm a person that's very interested in railroad history.
In the early 1900s, the Ozarks was mainly covered in forest that was rich in timber, that could not be harvested. But that was soon to change. Deep in the heart of the Ozarks forest stood a railroad that brought in new jobs, as people came from hundreds of miles to work on this new railroad. New towns began to form. Elkins, Combs are just a few that came from the railroad. There are many railroads that have come and gone, but for Tom, one railroad particularly stood out to him.
Was the Combs, Cass, and Eastern Railroad, which was the highest railroad in Arkansas, a standard gauge railroad that was devoted solely to hauling lumber, that operated in Madison and Franklin counties, Arkansas, between 1912 and 1928 approximately. The reason I was interested in it was there are a lot of areas of evidence of the railroad's existence, including the Y, which was used to turn the engine around, and also there were 4 very large wooden trestles, and evidence of the trestles and the cuts remains in abundance, mainly in the Ozark National Forest. We're looking, what I'm looking for is a cut through rock that was one leg of the Y. The Y had 3 legs. One was the main line, and then it had 2 components. I thought it was important, and fortunately through a contact in Ozark, I began to contact old people who might have personal first-hand knowledge of the Combs, Cass, and Eastern, and also life in Cass and in Combs. And I was fortunate, and I talked to probably 20 people, and I visited quite a few of the people who were elderly, and from them I gathered bits and pieces of information that was first-hand observations to weave into a coherent story of the Combs, Cass, and Eastern. It lived off of transfers of money from the parent company, the J.H. Phipps Lumber Company in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which was a primary customer for many of the logs. My thought that we need to preserve it is simply it provides a window into the past and into a different way of life. And by studying the railroad, we can learn more about the lives of the individuals who lived in the Ozarks and died in the Ozarks.
Even though the railroad is gone, the stories of the past is what's so important to keep alive. And for Tom, the trip back to visit the railroad was well worth it.
Getting a job on the outside of the farm was, I guess, next to impossible. And so this was salvation for many of the farm families in Arkansas.
In 1933, jobs were scarce, people were hungry. FDR offered a new deal, and young men answered the call for work. The Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, located camps throughout the country. One of the camps on the Ozark National Forest was the CCC Camp Ozone. Sisters Lois Best Yates and Reba Patton credit the CCC for saving the family farm and teaching their father, Luther Best, a trade that he would carry on in his career.
Daddy was also a mason, and that fit right in, and he learned all his cementing work. We lived at Breezy Hill owned by Bud Shep for many years, and he did they were log houses, and he jacked them up and put rock walls and foundation. They had good foundations, but he redid all of those.
The CCC followed the tradition of the military and its structure.
He wouldn't have known how to do anything if it hadn't been for the CCCs, you know. And
I never heard him say anything bad about him.
No. And keeping this all these years, you know, would make you think that he was. And he drove all over the country when they started having the reunions to advertise this and get the boys to come. And so he would have done anything to get that camp where people could understand what it was all about, because the people driving in the park didn't even realize the foundations were out there at that time. It was all covered by a mass jungle that we had to clean up. And at first they were just using the campground. They set up their picnic and tables all around, and then the Forest Service, Marge Dryden, had a grant to build the pavilion out there, and eventually the interpretive trail.
The men of the CCC were not only building the country's infrastructures, they were building themselves.
I think it helped men boys grow into good men, you know. Those that were there at the reunions all felt the same way as Daddy, that it saved them from any kind of crime. It made them the character that you'd want in the communities.
Rivers flow not past, but through us, tingling, vibrating, exciting every cell and fiber in our bodies, making them sing and glide. John Muir. In 1968, Congress passed the National Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, allowing the preservation of certain rivers with outstanding natural, cultural, and recreational values in a free-flowing condition.
My name's Matt Pfeifler, and I am the Recreation Manager for the Pleasant Hill Ranger District in Clarksville, Arkansas. I've been with the Forest Service for just over 2 years. The Mulberry River is a wild and scenic river established in 1992, and we have 2 campgrounds on this river, Wolf Pen and Redding. We have 2 canoe launches for the visitors to use, and really it's about, you know, just getting out here and experiencing the views and the you know, everything that it has to offer. It's a lot of spring fed from the mountains, and you know, typically in the spring when we get a lot of rain, it'll fill up quick. We've got a lot of tributaries that flow into the river.
Recreational opportunities are abundant on and along the Mulberry. The river and the scenic byway of Highway 215 that runs parallel in many places to the river tell a deeper tale, one of culture and history.
The Mulberry River is a special place. Many people come here to enjoy the many recreational opportunities that it has to offer. The canoeing, the hiking, the rock climbing, Additionally, it offers a wonderful driving opportunity because you can drive miles along this road and see beautiful vistas of the river. But it's also an area that's steeped in history. And we have very strong interest in heritage tourism and the history of this area from the public, because many of the families that come here are themselves third or fourth generation descendants of people that lived and worked in these communities 100, 150 years ago.
It's a very beautiful area. We have a lot of wildlife, different birds, a lot of scenery here, and you know, it gets you outdoors, and it's a really good experience.
Have you ever thought of a career with the Forest Service? Let's meet some people who work with the Ozark National Forest. They will tell us why is it worthy to have a job like them.
I'm Carol Swaboni. I'm the archaeological technician for the Pleasant Hill Ranger District on the Ozark St. Francis National Forest.
I'm Matthew Ferguson. I work on the Boston Mountain Ranger District on the Ozark St. Francis National Forest. I am a supervisory engine captain, and I'm in charge of our fire engine there, and work for the FMO and support the fire program there.
My name is Mindy Lawson. I'm the district wildlife biologist on Mount Magazine Ranger District on the Ozark National Forest.
Hello, my name is Napoleon Reed, and I'm a forester for the Ozark St. Francis National Forest for the Pleasant Hill Ranger District located in Clarksville, Arkansas.
My name is Tristan Cooper. I work for the Pleasant Hill Ranger District in Clarksville, Arkansas for the U.S. Forest Service.
The Forest Service offers a wide range of jobs, from the natural management type, like wildlife biologist or archaeologist, to administrative careers, like accounting and human resources.
If you're currently in school, in college, and pursuing either a natural resources degree or an administrative degree, you can always search for intern-styled positions. It's called our Pathways program. And it's not just the Forest Service that uses the Pathways program, it's all federal agencies. So the Pathways program hires 3 types of students. We have a temporary summer-styled position that's called our Pathways intern with a not to exceed. We also have our more long-term Pathways type positions that pretty much work around your school schedule. And those are just Pathways interns. And once those folks graduate, then they're converted into a permanent appointment. And then the third type of appointment we have for college students is called our Recent Grads program. So if you graduated within the last 2 years, then you're eligible to apply for any positions that we have under the Recent Grads program. All of our vacancies are posted on one centralized website, and it's usajobs.gov. If you don't meet one of the Pathways criteria, meaning you're not currently in college or you didn't recently graduate in the last 2 years, we advertise a lot of our positions just to the general public. So you can apply and compete for those positions that way as well.
But besides all the opportunities that exist to enter into this organization, what is the best part about working for the Forest Service?
The best thing about my job is being outdoors, observing nature, seeing it in its condition, and being able to watch it change over time. And it's truly an amazing experience. Having a degree in forest science, knowing what things to look at and to watch them change and to see how conditions change over time through an extended period of time, and how our management help transition forests to our desired conditions.
I really enjoy being outside, and I really enjoy working with the tractor and working on these food plots and just managing wildlife in general. It's a really fun job, and I do different things almost every day, so it never gets boring.
Definitely what I enjoy the most about my job is the flexibility it gives me. I have a lot of office work to do because I am a program manager, but when that gets to be a little overwhelming at times, I can go out on the forest and there's always work out there to be done. There's survey work to do. There's always something to do. So I have the best of both worlds. When it's freezing cold outside, I can be in the office. And when it's really nice and I need a break to enjoy nature, I can go out on the forest.
The thing I enjoy the most is this right here. I get to go all over the Southeast, teach and train and teach people how to sharpen these old tools. It's a lost art. I get to meet a lot of folks, cut down a lot of trees, and clear trails with these saws right here. I really enjoy it, really enjoy the history, because this saw right here could have been used by somebody in an old eastern logging camp to put wood on decks and help build this country.
What we want to do is document this. We'll measure, we'll sketch, we'll take GPS points, and we'll have everything about this site documented. It'll be documented and preserved and kept just for future reference, for future research. And any actions or proposals that the Forest Service has in this area, we have this documented. It would be flagged out of the proposed area, and it would be protected from anything like if a new road was coming through, any logging activities that would be going on. You know, we would avoid this area. Not let this be destroyed. It'll be preserved for our kids and the kids of the generations to come. So we feel that's pretty important. It's the heritage of the people of the Ozarks, and we think that's something that's pretty important to protect.
Then, if you're looking for more than a job but a career, the Forest Service might be for you, where caring for the land and serving the people is the everyday mission.
We have a big prescribed burn program here on the Ozark National Forest, and so what we do with the helicopter is on these large block burns, usually anything could be as small as 700 acres and larger, we'll bring the helicopter over and we'll use this machine right here, and we will start to burn from the helicopter. This ball will catch on fire and it'll start a whole bunch of small fires, and we'll drop thousands of balls out of this machine onto the burn, and they will all burn together, and when it's completed, we'll have a completed burn. We want to improve that land. One thing we could do is to get rid of the dead fuel. The dead things they're gonna burn one way or another. And the hazard is if we leave all this dead fuel out into the woods and a wildfire happens, that wildfire is gonna take all that available fuel at its own pace and burn it, which is gonna be pretty fast and pretty hot. So we have learned to take the opportunity when the fire is not going to burn real hot, that we can go ahead and burn it ourselves. So if we have a wildfire that summer in that same area, there's not going to be as much fuel to burn. When we're talking about fuel, it's anything that can burn. So we have ground fuel, a mid-story fuel, and an upper story fuel. If the fire is already going to stay on the ground, we don't want any of that fuel that could carry it up into the crown of a tree. If there is an area that has not been managed at all for fuel reduction or hardly anything else, and a wildfire comes into it, it could take different levels. It's going to burn very hot, but it may not just stay on the ground anymore. That fire, if it had shrubs and thorns and vines, 6 feet tall, and got into the canopy, the bottom parts of a tree, and that tree was dead, that fire could very easily come from staying on the ground, lift up, and get into the crown of a tree. And if there were enough of those trees, we could eventually have a crown fire, big intensity, hot fire. With the prescribed burn, if we burn that same area and a wildfire started outside that area, once it burns into the area we've already burned, the fire is going to stay small because it doesn't have that mid-story anymore. There's nothing to take that fire up into the top of the trees because we burned it. Or we've reduced the fuel, and so it's not going to be as hot as it would have been if we would have done nothing. Smoky does put out the famous "Only You Can Prevent Wildfires," and that's still a message today. Smoky Bear's a very successful fire prevention campaign. It's 70 years this year Smoky's been around. Smoky is the second most notable character in the world, only behind Santa Claus. So Smoky is very important to us. We still do Smoky programs every year in the area and across the country. And yeah, with Smokey saying only you can prevent wildfires puts a good message, a face on the message that we've been trying to get out to the public for a long time.
My name is Napoleon Reed. I'm a forester here on the Pleasant Hill Ranger District for the Ozark-St. Francis National Forest. My current title is a forester. As a forester, I go out and perform stand exams and make recommendations and write prescriptions in order to move our stand and forward towards our desired future conditions.
Napoleon's job is rather difficult to explain, but a good comparison is that he is a doctor for the forest, writing prescriptions and giving medical care when needed to the various parts and elements that make up the ecosystem that is the Ozarks-St. Francis National Forest. Sometimes, he does so by taking cross-sections in order to examine the different aspects of a tree's life.
This was a black cherry, looks like it, and what we mean by a cross-section, or sometimes referred to as a cookie, is a sample that's taken from a tree. And so, say this tree was cut down, and then sections of that tree would have been cut into smaller pieces that can be taken to a laboratory that can be viewed under a microscope.
Napoleon does not do this work alone. He has support from other individuals with a variety of skill sets, including...
Hi, my name is Greg Taylor, and I am the wildlife biologist for the Pleasant Hill Ranger District of the Ozark National Forest. And my primary job is to make sure that we have diverse and sustainable wildlife populations on our public lands. And a lot of what I do deals with habitat management, and that's mainly through mechanical means of manipulating vegetation, as well as use of prescribed fire and chemical use to provide diverse habitats for a suite of wildlife on our public lands.
Some of the animals in which Greg is trying to help within the local ecosystem include, but are not limited to, the white-tailed deer, the black bear, and the pileated woodpecker. The management process begins with an unmanaged section of land, which is then thinned and burned over time to encourage regrowth of the native plants and the return of native species, some of which have not been seen in Arkansas in quite some time. The end result of all of this hard work is a scene that is so beautiful that this reporter did not want to leave.
For all this, we're in the soil seed bank, just waiting to come up. The stuff had grown here for years and years, and once it had the opportunity to grow, from the canopy being opened up and prescribed fire run through here, the stuff was just waiting to come back.
From the smallest blade of grass to the largest tree, everything falls under the purview of ecosystems, and it is the responsibility of each and every one of us to stand as good stewards and take care of the land with which we have been entrusted.